Welcome everyone to the Human-Centered Design UAE Meetup. My name is Jonathan Steingisser. I'm Head of Product Design at Property Finder. If you've got any questions and we ran out of time today for myself or Brenton, please feel free to add us on LinkedIn, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have. Technical difficulty. Dave, will help. I'll go off memory. The session is going to be recorded. We do have a YouTube channel, so if you haven't heard past sessions, then or if you have to leave early, or if you're online and you have to run away, you can definitely catch up on our YouTube channel. It's Human-Centered Design, United Arab Emirates. This wouldn't be possible without our team. Huge thank you, of course, to Atolye and the whole Atolye team. We're going to hear a little bit. If this is your first time, I know some of you haven't been here before. We'll hear about the wonderful space. We've got a great partnership with all of our friends at Atolye. And some of the co-organizers aren't here today, but they do a lot of work behind the scene. Assad is here. Thanks, Assad. And thanks for bringing the Emirates NBD crew. Nada and Greta as well do a lot of work, so thank you to them. We are on too many channels on socials. We probably should simplify socials, and you want to tag us, please do so. I'm probably standing in the way, but that's it. Mostly Instagram and LinkedIn. Please take a picture of this. And if you're on, or you can just remember these numbers, 636-297. We've started this a couple of meetups ago. It's pretty cool. We allow you to ask any questions you might have throughout the talk, and then you can vote on everybody else's questions. At the end of the session, we'll look at that, and even if you think of questions, then you can keep adding to this list. And again, if anything we run out of time doesn't get answered, then we'll make sure we hit it up. Everyone got it? 636-297. Brendan can mention it later. Okay. We're just getting the glitches out for you early, Brenton. So one other thing is you can ask anonymously, but it does help if we know what your name is. That's okay. So if you can add your name in the top right corner of the Slido app, we can then know who's asking. If you've got a follow-up or anything, we can hit you up there. So I just want to welcome Dina. Dana, sorry,
it's been
Dina.
like 4 or 5 months that we've been working together.
My apologies. I've got Dina on the line. She's going to tell us about Atolye. Thanks, Dana.
Hi, welcome back, everybody. So many familiar faces and a few new ones. Whose first time is at Atolye or at the space particularly? Okay, well, welcome. I just wanted to quickly introduce Atolye and what we're about. So, Dave. Thank you so much for being my manual clicker. This is our awesome venue and associate, by the way. So this is Dave. I'm Dana. I'm the community associate, and that's Hadil. She's our event associate here. And we are a community-powered organization that places a design studio and academy at the heart of a vibrant creative hub. We have hubs in Istanbul and Dubai, and we have a membership-based community that brings together creative leaders and innovators to connect, learn, and build together. So this is the Creative Hub here in Dubai. So, you know, if you decide to join our community or apply to our community, a few of the benefits of being a community member include, well, first of all, people, we're all great. Kidding. No, not really, but we try to get to know every single member on a one-on-one basis. So you have this vetted network that you have access to when you join the community. 2 is experiences. So we're all about co-creating content and experiences with our members. So we create experiences with our members rather than for them. You have access to this wonderful space. So this space is super dynamic. During the day, it's a co-working space. We have meeting rooms, project rooms, and we also have a secret upstairs working area and a great patio. Now the weather is so great. So we do, there's outlets and Wi-Fi outside. So a lot of people end up working outside these days. And finally, opportunities. So at Atolye, as we said, we have a studio and we work on strategic design projects. So we like to collaborate with our members on projects. So if you're interested in working on projects with us, it's a great way to, it's a great segue to join. And yeah, that's about it. I mean, I heard there's rooftop yoga happening upstairs. So I think you all made a great choice by joining Brenton tonight. And thank you. Yeah, I'll pass the mic over to you.
So I'm just going to introduce Brenton. If we could go to the next slide, if the clicker's not working. Thank you, Donna. Sorry about getting your name wrong.
Oh, okay. No, it's all good. Oh, that's everything. I just went through everything. Yeah.
So just one more, if you don't mind. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Donna. Brenton's a fellow Aussie. I love his koala in his LinkedIn profile there. He is currently the Strategy and Experience Design Manager at Digital Labs, which is part of Majid Al Futtaim. And he's currently working on the future experience strategy for Ski Dubai, Tilal Al Ghaf's Innovation and Experience Center. I think he's going to share some of that with us, which is really exciting. He's proudly from Melbourne, Australia, and has studied communication interaction design from Billy Blue Design College. Good Aussie name. Without further ado, over to you, Brenton.
I've got two mics now. Do you want this one? Right, that's working. All right. I'm going to be doing too many things at once at the same time. All right. So I've got notes on this computer while we're navigating that one there. So just stay with me for 2 seconds. Cool. Okay. Next. So my name is Brenton, as Jonathan did introduce me as Experience Strategist Manager at Digital Labs at Majid Al Futtaim. Just to give you a bit of a clue for anyone who doesn't know about Digital Labs is like an internal agency at Majid Al Futtaim. What we do is we serve all the business units within Majid Al Futtaim and kind of take on what their future vision projects are going to look like, kind of the 10x experience projects and so forth. So we currently looking after things like the community centres, we're looking after the leisure entertainment, going to food and beverage, share, Vox Cinema and everything going along those lines as well. Digital Labs is been open now for about 2 years within Majid Al Futtaim, so we are quite new, but hopefully I'll be able to show you some of the stuff we do and soon you'll be able to see it released when it does actually come live. So basically, yeah, we're a business to better understand and accelerate the digital ambitions of Majid Al Futtaim. We're working across fashion, retail, share, everything else in between, as I was kind of mentioning before. Basically, our team in particular, we're only a couple of us here in Dubai, about 200 employees in total, which is fully remote. So our creative director is in Miami. He's the ex-creative director at Fantasy. We've got people from the UK, Ukraine, Russia, everywhere in between as well. So we're quite broad. And we're also actively looking for people desperately. But yeah, just give a bit of a look at some of our work. So we work with multiple different business units and we're really there to kind of really push the limits. We've got everyday communities. This is the new community app which is going to be coming out for Tilal Al Ghaf, which is kind of looking at the customizable villas available in the area, which will allow buyers to come in, customize their villas, be able to see it come to life, and as it progresses and builds, they'll get updates to the app as well. So as you can kind of see, we're really kind of leveraging what we know about Majid Al Futtaim and really kind of push the limits with that. This will actually be out quite soon, but we're also working across multiple different business units from the malls. This is going to be the will.i.am AI app coming out soon, which is quite interesting super app. And we've got the Vox Cinema coming out soon as well. And that's more communities work. So yeah, that's just a brief introduction to what I do at Majid Al Futtaim. So we've got the strategy crew, which I'm part of, and we run some of our clients through about 12, 20-week strategy pieces. We take them through the whole process, going from understanding the business units, understanding the needs, articulating the vision, create a story coming out of the narrative as well, research, forecasting trends, and then bring that into an experience itself that we bring to life. But yeah, today, introduction to object-oriented UX. Before I get started, I'd just like to know two things. How many of you are studying or working at the moment? Have we got studying? Okay, that's hands down. Okay, working. All right, are we in-house or are we agency? Agency? In-house? We've got in-house? Cool. Okay, agency? Okay, lovely. I can split out the different examples based on those, hopefully. Usually it's a mixed crowd, so I'm glad we can get into it. Has anyone heard of object-oriented UX before, apart from Jonathan? No? Okay. All right. There was two ways I could have went with this. I could have went with something quite in-depth and technical because it does get overwhelming. And when I first came across it, like literally I had to read it 3 or 4 times within the first year, and then I still didn't get it. And then I still get stuck at times as well. So I've brought things back. This is really just an introduction into the methodology, why people are using it, why I find it beneficial and how I've used it in some of my projects, and really just an introduction to what it is. So hopefully it helps in some regard. Let's make it one. So what we're going to see today is a bit what OOUX really is, and how can it help experience projects, how object-oriented UX has helped me take the complexity of some of the projects I've been working on, and hopefully by the end of it, I'll be able to give you some insights that you can start not taking on the process in particular, but just think about maybe some of your projects a little bit more differently when it comes into it. There's a couple of bit of holes that I believe OOUX does solve, but we'll go into that in a minute or two. So object-oriented UX really is about designing experiences to be intuitive to the real world as possible. And what I mean by that is it's trying to replicate what we know as users coming into an experience and replicating their mental models so we can start to break down and create requirements for our projects based off the mental models. I'm going to go into this a little bit further on, so if it sounds very confusing at the time, bear with me. But it's basically an approach that allows us to work with content strategists and developers a lot closely. If you think about developers have been working in object-oriented language for so many years now, they're thinking about how different things are working, domain-driven design in particular. They're looking at how different accounts works with profiles, works with the actual object of events and so forth. So they're connecting things together. If we look at content strategists, they're looking at things like content models and micro content strategies and how they work together. And then it comes to designers and UXers, then we're talking about journeys, which is a completely different language at times. And I'm sure some of our PMs here have been frustrated because someone's talking about different areas and different spots they're trying to put together while designers are doing journeys. So this in particular is a way that we can all speak the same language. You can start bringing in your content strategists and developers a little bit earlier as a designer or a UX designer. And you can start solving those problems as a team a little bit earlier on in the process. 2 seconds. So traditionally, when we've been looking at products and features, as I've just kind of briefly mentioned, is we're looking at basically requirements and we've been looking at user actions. Now, what object-oriented UX comes and do, it says, let's not think about the actions and requirements first from a user task perspective, but let's look at what the objects are, what make up the experience. Now, when I'm talking about objects, I'll go into the actual definition of objects a little bit later on, but it's the pieces, it's the building blocks, what make up the experience itself. So it's taking a step back. We're not looking at how many headers we've got. We're not looking at if we've got a home page. We're looking at things like, do we need an account that works with events? And then do we need events that works with, lessons and so forth. So it's looking at the total building blocks and then looking at the relationship between those building blocks so we can start to build a system and understand the system before we get into requirements and user tasks and how it all comes together. So really at the start of everything, instead of looking at the nouns first and looking at the actions first, we take a step back and look for the verbs and we look for the objects first. Before I continue, is this all good with everyone? Can everyone hear me? I'm not speaking too quickly or anything? All good? Okay. So generally when we learn something, and it might be us as a kid, or it might be learning a new language, or you might be explaining something, or you might be explaining something new to someone, we always start off with explaining what are the objects, what take up that thing. So if we're talking about football here, we describe it as you've got players, we've got soccer goals, we've got football goals, we've got a pitch, and we've got a ball. And then what we do is we describe, oh, we're going to kick that ball to each other, and we're going to get that through the goal. So really what we're doing then, the easiest way to take in the environment is to look for the objects first and then the actions later. Now, revert back to what I was saying before, generally we're getting product requirements, we're talking about tasks first. And we talk about journeys first, but we don't even know what's actually building up the system in the first place. We don't know what those objects are. We don't know how they're defined, which makes it a little bit more harder. We kind of jump in the gun a bit. So yeah, what this process really does is it really helps us kind of get aligned with the developers, content strategists, and helps us kind of get the complexity of what some of those requirements might be and make sure that everyone's speaking the same language in the team. So a classic example for this is if we were talking about an airline website that we're going to be building, some people might call the tickets passes, or someone might call it passes, or someone might call it a boarding pass. And what you're saying is this pass, there's different variations of that, but we know that's one thing, and we're going to define that right now and going on before going to continue on. So it's really about defining what those different objects are, what make up the experience before going on and trying to make it complicated.
There you go.
But as I was kind of going in before, this doesn't mean actions and tasks don't matter. It's just that you can easily break down products and experience easier if you're looking at the objects first. Let's skip forward a bit. That's fine. And going back to the example, if we were learning a new language, for instance, again, just to reiterate that, we will really be rarely, unless we're doing tasks, would rarely be going, I'm going to feed, going into a new experience, you wouldn't be learning the actions first, you'd be learning the actual objects itself. Can we continue? And everything else in between. So I realized some of these slides are repeating themselves, so I'm just going to skip forward a little bit. So Object Orientated UX is basically a philosophy for designing digital systems that respects the fact that people think in objects and needs consistent recognizable objects to understand an environment or product. People who practice OOUX deliberately align their software or experience to their software's real need mental models of concrete defined products that in the abstract digital worlds can be naturally intuitive to the physical world that we evolve. So what that means is not only when we think about the objects that make up the system, but we're also relating it to the mental models of someone how might think about that object coming into it or that experience coming into it. A classic example of this, going back to the airlines, when we kind of associate what the pass or ticket or boarding pass is, at that point as well, we can align on our customer research and go, okay, all our users are calling it this one aligned object in itself going through. So it's really about aligning, going back to the user's mental models and making up the system itself. And it's a secret weapon really for breaking down complexity in experiences. But OOUX is not a design system. It's really here just to inform your design system. And what it can really do is it sets up the building blocks so when you're doing component mapping, you know exactly what your needs of the objects are coming through. You've got a little bit more structure and a little bit more of a help trying to get that. So what we've got on the side on the left here is your classic OOUX structure, which I'll get to in a minute or two. But what we'll see on the left here is a couple of blue notes. And what this is representing right here is a system for a recipe app for a couple of recipe app. So what we've got there at the top is chef, recipe, product, event, property, and guest. And what this is kind of iterating is that making up this recipe app, we're going to have a chef. That chef is going to have a name. It's going to have a profile picture. He's going to have a bio. He's going to have a status. Now that it's in red, we know that's the data that the chef's going to be made up of. It's a different kind of filter and attribute that we can make up of that. And we know that the recipe component, recipe object, might sit in with the chef component itself. So what we can kind of do here is we can kind of understand what these objects are in the experience and start to see how they're linked together as well. So when we talk about contextual navigation, especially inside an app when we don't want to use the navigation, we want the people to be able to naturally go to the next object or to the next kind of screen, in particular what's related to what they're looking at the time. So it's making connection between the different variations of objects. It's understanding the content within those objects. It's understanding the data and filters and the attributes you might be able to use within each. But just to reiterate, the components are not objects. Objects are there as the starting blocks, and later on we then go to define what the components are, making up of those. So you'll use a classic example of this, and going back to the whole component object thing, because it keeps coming up a couple of times, is your user isn't coming to experience for the calendar picker, which is your component. Unless you're a designer, you might be going to a website to check out a calendar picker. What you're going to be going there is for events. And the user's mental model there is, I want to check out the events. Yes, the calendar picker is a part of that experience for me to understand what event I'm going to, but really the thing they're going for there and what's in their thought process is checking out events. So what are objects? Basically, objects are real world things that have value to the business and all your users, that make up the user's mental model within the experience you are designing. So we try and relate it back to real world terms. We don't use jargon. If we think about, let's say, I'm trying not to use the example I've just been working, it's going to be coming up soon. But if we're thinking about things like going back to the recipe app itself, we're talking about chefs. We're not giving them a jargon name. We're not giving them, I don't know, what's a fancy name for a chef? I'm not sure, but we're giving it to things that everyday people will understand going through there as well. There we go. We're not going ahead, but so this is an interesting part of this, because under the chef or the cook or whatever it is, the hand of kitchen is a different variation of that. So really it's a person, it's the same object, but it's just a different filter. So we've just actually matched up a bit of data, what comes with that object. And when we get into it, if we were describing a person going through there, we'll need the same structures for us to recognize the structure for each of those people, right? So once we start identifying the different variations of that object, we can then start to make consistent structures going within those objects itself, so to speak. So we're creating consistent experiences and consistent templates to be matched up to everyday things that people will recognize. If we think about going back to events, if we talk about different variations of events, we've got single day events, multi-day events, online events, but you don't want to make templates or different structures for each of those. They're the same variation of the same thing. So it's really bringing back the basics, understanding what those high-end objects are, understanding what the variations are, and when you're making those templates or those structures for those objects, you're making sure that you're getting all the content needed, so you're not halfway through the design process and be like, oh man, we need a bio, or we need extra data coming into this because we've got a new online event coming through and now we need a link in there. It's keeping the same consistent experience and the same consistent templates for each. So let's imagine for a moment that we are designing an app for an endangered species app. Right, so an app which is talking about endangered species. It may give information to you about what you wanted to donate or being able to identify endangered species. What do you think what kind of objects do you think would make up this app? Yeah, so we've got animals, yep. Locations, so facts, yep. Hang on, sorry, slow down. Yep, so that's a bit of data about the animals in particular. So that would be a data set within the animals. So the data count, yep.
Donation.
Oh, donation, yes, so payment, correct. And that could be multiple things. It could be payment from an individual, it could be a payment from a corporation, whether we need the same structure or not, it's the same object, we don't know. But yeah, you get the kind of general idea. So really coming up from there, kind of predefined, is we've got our species or animals, we've got habitats, we've got, if it could be non-profit or not. We've got a donation, which someone mentioned before as well. We've got if there might be a public figure coming up between there, and we've got things like news articles, research studies, and volunteer ops. Now, what usually happens in this instance is people will think about things like cows or think about, I don't know, leopards, and they'll start to define those as different objects, but really they're just the same variation of the same object. So when we're talking about this app in particular, all the animals should have the same content structure and they should be linking to the same thing. So if we talk about our species of animal, we'll also know that the species of animal will have a connection to the habitat. So the habitat component we make, or the object we make about the habitat, needs to be nested within the animal so we can easily contextually navigate between the two. So what does the actual OOUX process look like? Before I get into it, I'm just briefly going over just a skim of it today. It can get quite in depth, but it is something worth to look into. So hopefully today I'll give you enough just to get your edge going and get a bit of an understanding of it to kind of do a bit more. But high pillar, it's around about identifying the objects which are in the experience that you'll be creating, match up to the user's mental models. Now, the way you kind of identify objects, and it's the best thing to go about it, is if you get your requirements, maybe you've done stakeholder interviews, maybe you're going through with customer interviews, you'll get people to start to describe what is the actual experience itself. And you can start to identify the verbs they're using. So if they're talking about an app and someone was talking about the description of the app, you should be able to identify, oh, they're going to have an account, they're going to have payment, all this kind of other thing. Then what we're able to do, once we've identified the objects going up to it, we'll be identifying the relationships between each of the objects, which we started to do a little bit before when we're talking about the animal, having a relationship to the habitat as well. We then look at the course of actions and what the actions that objects will let us, the users, to do. So if it's payment, we know we have a payment action within there as well. If it's habitat, we're probably going to have find more. We're going to identify lots of these different actions within those objects as well. And once again, we can identify this the way people are speaking about the app, the way they're describing it. And we get this from our customer interviews, from our stakeholder interviews and business meetings and so forth. So the kind of difference of this to what you might be used to is you'll get an RFP, you'll get a project brief, and you'll have all these requirements down. And you might be just be thinking like, okay, cool, we'll just do a homepage and it needs to have these requirements, tick the box. But what this really does, it starts to question and starts to make you question what's actually built up of the system and how is the system actually working together as a whole and how is it all connected together. And then we go into attributes and filters, which is something, we'll continue. So sort of different rounds. So as the acronym is ORCA, believe it or not. So the first round is going into object discovery, relationship discovery, which have been over, CTA discovery, and attribute and filter discovery. We then go through rounds of requirements where we kind of untangle the complexity a little bit. So we go through object requirements, and it still goes through the same process over and over and over. And basically what the end goal is to discover what the objects are, discover what makes up the objects, discover what's connected with the objects, what data we can use within it. Then what we can do is start doing the prioritization based off the user's needs itself. So we started getting a lot of content strategists will probably think, well, yeah, we're doing this in our content models. But it's a great way to start working with them because now you've got actual things from the developers being like, yeah, this is the data we can actually use for this. You're not making up different rules and experiences that the developers turn around and say, hey, we can't actually do this because we don't actually have the data for it. And then what comes into it a little bit later on is when you start your kind of UX process of then being able to have your wireframes. But the good thing about it, you're not going to wireframes just blindly. You've got all these requirements and you've got an understanding of how it should work together. So going back to our recipe app, we've got our core objects at the top there. We've got our core content coming through. There's some lovely sticky notes. We've got our metadata, and then we've got our nested objects that we were talking about before. So if we're looking at the events in particular, so this as an object as itself, we'll then start to prioritize the content within the actual event. So we've gone, okay, this is everything what makes up the events object itself. What based on the user is more important? Okay, we're talking about title, we're talking about date and time, and we're able to then look at the structure before actually messing around with wireframes and having to work about space and everything else in between and wasting time basically. Then what happens is we say, what's the different variations of event? Okay, so we've got a card we need for an event. We're using the data based on the prioritization. We need a detail. So we're still using the same content coming off of the same data, same prioritization. And we've got a list as well. Now, each of those kind of different objects or different variations or skins of an object use the same content, they use the same prioritization, and they use the same needs, and it's coming off the same requirements. What you'll find if you go into examples, even Netflix does this, the difference between their web and mobile experience. If you look at the seasons card, you'll see that sometimes it has a description and play button and save. Then on another experience, it doesn't have any of that altogether, even though to us, it's showing an event or a TV, so it's showing a TV show, but on different experiences, it's showing different information with different actions. With this kind of approach, you're making sure that everything is consistent, and no matter how you showcase that object, whether it be a list, card, or detail page, you're showcasing, prioritizing what's most relevant to your users all the time. Basically, this is what wireframing used to look like for me a fair bit. There was just a lot of annotations going backwards and forwards. Obviously, we're doing Figma now and whatnot. We'll have our creative director coming on there, UX director coming on, commenting, what's this going to do here? Or it should be coming over here. But at least with this kind of approach and general thinking about things, we can start to look at, look, this is where the requirements coming from. This is that we've made this together. It's not coming from the PM. It's not coming from the BA. It's not coming from the client. It's something we've brought up and we've got the structure together. So something you read here, OOUX is not a new UX process or anything. It comes, like if you were going to use instances of it, and I would encourage that people do investigate more about it because it's so much more complex than what I've been over today. But it shows glimpses and different pockets of things you can use as a lead up to get more concrete requirements for your UX projects, experience projects, and design projects. And it makes you have a closer working team with the developers and content also. So just to kind of reiterate there, we do our object mapping coming together. So we identify the object maps, we look through a CTA matrix, we start to identify the other artifacts, whether it be data, whether it be nested components and how they're actually linked together. We've looked at how those objects then get transformed into different states, so to speak. So you start to building your templates here a little bit and getting template requirements. Then what comes later is then you're looking at the tasks and how that's working between each other. So you're looking at your interaction design then. Now what's happening here is because you've got the requirements of the templates and everything else in between, the interaction design becomes a lot easier because you've got a strategy behind it to why your users will be thinking in certain ways and how it should be acting. You're not looking at the interaction of the way it's moving based on what it looks and what the usability of that is like, but you've got a little bit more thought process behind where someone might be coming from or where might be going to afterwards as well. So your interaction becomes a little bit more relevant as well. And then, yeah, so this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, but we start to look into, as we were talking before, we're identifying the objects, what make up an experience. So this is for a classroom course. We're looking at, on the side there, we've got students, which will always have a course within an Academy app, which will also have a lecture. So we're starting to look at the relationships between each of those there as well. We know that one student will have one or many more courses, but a lecturer might only have one course to look after and more than one student in particular. So when we're looking at the relationships of the different objects, what make up the experience, we're also counting how many, what's the weighting of that relationship as well, and how many different times we're coming through there. So if there's lots of variations of courses and classes, we know there's in that template, we're going to have to leave a pretty big space to kind of showcase the next relevant classes. Maybe it's 3 or 4. When it really, if it's a lecturer going through it, maybe don't need to give as much variety, but we understand the relationship between the objects nonetheless. And that's just another variation of how the nested object matrix looks like coming through there. And mind you, it can get quite complex. So generally, when you look at this, going to OOUX, you actually try and limit yourself only to 10 objects at the most, because then it gets way too complicated and you get way ahead. It's only there to get a basic understanding. You could be working on a government website which needed realistically 50 objects, but really you're going to be wasting time. It's really there to just get an initial understanding to get the ball rolling, and so you're basing yourself off requirements basically. So yeah, thank you. As I was saying before, like this is only the kind of the scraping of the surface of OOUX. I didn't want to go too in depth because I didn't want to get too technical with this as well, because it can go quite nerdy. But I hope you enjoyed it so far, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Whoa, sorry. Am I too close to the mic? What's going on? I unfortunately was busy being the clicker and didn't watch all of the questions online. Hopefully people added questions. Does anyone want to add any more questions? I'll just go back. I think it was.
There are 7 questions. First one is, where did we get the ORCA from?
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. The first question was what? Where did we get? Oh, that was a joke. How do we get involved with digital labs? That's a good question.
Great question.
We're developers in Jordan. So developers we've got in Oman, in Jordan. So that's not really our realm, but experienced strategy people. So out of the box thinkers who want to get in a bit of realm of service design, a bit of customer experience, and kind of really get deep in strategy. Let me know. We do work at a fairly fast pace, but it's good. It's great work. Really, it gets me excited every time. And then the designers, we're needing designers. We're needing a lot of designers. We've got a lot of art directors at the moment, not many UI product people. So that's a need. Feel free to reach out.
We've got a great question here. There's a lot of comments on popcorn, which is great. Glad you like the popcorn. How do you see product design evolving in 2022? So I guess I'll kind of elaborate on that. Like, how have you seen the pandemic affect the industry? What are some of maybe the trends you've seen this year? And where do you see the future?
Yeah, I'm guessing you mean as a way kind of ways of working area. Anything in particular? I mean, I guess even our ways of working at Digital Labs, like our creative director is in Florida, and he just came from Fantasy Design Studio, and we've got people coming from Meta Labs. We've got people in Italy. We've got people coming from the other studios, but they're all in their home country still. And I think that looking at product design, we're fully remote basically. So yeah, when we're talking about features of product design, sure, that's how we see it. Depends what you mean by product design. If you want to get my perception on the actual task itself of product design, I feel like people are going to be a bit more specialized going into the field. So they're going to splitting out to UI focus, UX focus, rather than being a mixture in between. And the reason why I say that, I've seen people trip up before taking on too much of the work, and they're not giving the UX enough focus to the complexity, or they're not getting their creative minds and looking to the UI close enough. They're two different brain sets in my mind. I was always a UX, I'll never be a UI person. I could do some pretty stuff, but I didn't have the audacity, I didn't have the drive to look at the interactions and the different ways 3D models can work around. That's a true UI designer. They're creative people. A UXer, in my perspective, is more, they would be thinking of a different kind of hemisphere of the brain. It's completely different. So I don't see product design being something that has, I don't know, it's bad to say, but I feel people are going to be more specialized in the future in that regard.
Cool. I'm not sure if you would label this as a brainstorming technique. It's probably more of a methodology. So I'm just kind of reframing the question, but it's a great question. How is object-oriented UX more efficient for you in comparison to other methodologies? Or what have you done in the past and how would you compare?
It's a great question. I think I'll go back to the example we're doing for Speed at the moment. So when we used to look at, or when I was kind of in my agency stage, when we were looking at requirements and everything coming through, we'd have a BA write out user stories and have tech telling us about what components we could and could not use. And we'll be having these experiences that as we're doing the user research, we're doing jobs to be done. And then we'll be developing the homepage first because the client want to see the homepage first. So we'll be seeing listing page because the client want to see listing page. And then what will happen with when we're looking at the components of those is we'll be like, oh, we also need an events page, but now this component, which is a flexible component, is needing to now cater for data or information that we haven't thought of yet. So it's about predicting. This approach really has helped me identify what the requirements of the content are before we start designing, especially when we talk about flexible components and trying to take in as much content as possible. So it's cutting down design time, mainly UX time and development time in the end. As a brainstorming technique, it's a great brainstorming technique. It helps everyone get involved and be on the same page of what you're actually designing and understanding the system. There's nothing worse than coming in and just designing a couple of pages and not knowing what's coming next. You don't know what the connection is between a profile and an account, or if there is any difference between those. You don't know if a membership package and pass is the same thing or not, and then it's confusing. And then you're designing a product which you're already confused about. Of course, the product's going to be confusing. So you're getting that kind of stuff over and done with. Brainstorming, get everyone aligned from the stakeholders. It's great. And it's a great way to inform your IA as well. So when we started doing the IA for a couple of websites, we weren't then just taking pages in groups. We were using our objects first to see how people would identify and group the different objects together in different parts of content. And we started basically an earlier start in IA because we're able to pick up on those patterns a lot easier as well.
The extension is, are there alternatives?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, there's heaps of alternatives out there. I think they all come under the name as Object Orientated UX or design or something. It's domain driven design as well, if you want to get into that. I think the BBC ages ago in 2017, they redesigned their whole TV season experience. They took a very similar approach. The reason why I talked about OOUX, I recently just did a certification by a girl named Sophie Prater. She's been doing it for a while. She's kind of made a full-time job now to look into this, and she kind of believes she's a great teacher. The ORCA methodology is something that she kind of coined, but OOUX and object-oriented design has been around for a very long time. It just hasn't been articulated that well, I don't think.
Sorry? Yes. Oh, we have another mic. Great. Thank you. Hopefully it works. Can you test it? I lost the thing. I was trying to log in for next time. Is ORCA related to entity relationship diagram? That was your question. Do you want to elaborate?
So, I mean, a couple of years ago, I worked on a startup project, and the developer sort of like wanted a good overall picture around the project. And we started off with the entity relationship diagram that sort of like brought me back to when you showed the objects. So I was just wondering if this is something that came out of that, or, you know.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. I think you'll be using crow's feet and you're using kind of technical diagrams to say the relationship between the two. The only difference here is instead of using crow feet to say the relationship, we're just spelling it out 0 to 1, 1 to many, everything else. It's exactly the same thing. But it's the reason why developers and designers use this methodology. You can kind of start speaking the same language and talk about the same things. Yeah.
Top of the voting now. Interesting diversion. Thoughts on the metaverse and its future in OOUX perspective?
All right. Thoughts on the metaverse and NFTs and everything else in between. Let's not bring OOUX into that. Because I do think there's a huge future for that. I've been pitching for metaverses now with digital labs and math for a while now, and they're finally catching on to branded NFTs and everything coming through there. So it does have some girth. I think the poster boys of what's going at the moment, it just needs to get a little bit more, not regulated obviously, but needs to get a little bit more familiar with everyone. But once it's out and about, once Solana comes to life and F isn't as expensive, yeah, we out and about, yeah. Especially look at McDonald's, they're just releasing branded NFTs now, which will be based around McDonald's communities. If you think about things, the street culture in particular, this kind of idea of creating tokens and communities within street culture itself, then you get access to new music, you get access to concerts. It's kind of a token instance community and culture. So when you talk about cultures and communities and bringing that to the digital world, I think it's got a huge possibility for sure. How's that related to OOUX? I guess it just makes that a lot more complicated. I wouldn't even know how to tackle a metaverse to design it, so maybe it would help break down complexity. I'm not sure.
Now, a bit more about ways of working. How do we align our team with OOUX, since a lot of us work remotely or with different teams across an organization, perhaps?
Yeah, so one thing I realized with this, because I used to explain to people in the agency I work for, and they'll kind of look at me being like, Brenton, we're not doing any more work. This is ridiculous. We're not doing this. I'm like, yeah, fair enough. And then I'd kind of do it and just do it for myself. So what I'll do is I'll look at the requirement brief, I'll be looking at the, and I'll just map out in the sticky notes, okay, this is the relationship between here, this is going through here. And when we went to the first client meeting, I remember having this kind of thing or this artifact ready, and I was able to have a lot more direct questions to it. So I just started doing it for myself and then show the other people what I was getting from it. And I was able to explain the project a lot clearer to my team members. And when my team members saw the benefit of it, then we started getting into the process a little bit more. So if you wanted to bring it to work process, I would say just do it by yourself first and then just start showing other people what the benefit is and what you're kind of learning from it as well.
There's a bit of a theme. I might kind of just bring it all together. How does OOUX work within maybe your traditional design process? So if we think more broadly, you know, service design blueprints, user journeys, etc. Waterfall, agile, like all of, like, how does it fit into
Yeah, like you're
Some of
doing
them.
your synthesizing research phase. So when you're synthesizing the briefs and everything. So I don't think anyone's that I've known really in their workplace has a methodology or process to understand the brief. Everyone just kind of gets written the brief and you've got 2 days to read it and you've got to go start designing, go into client meetings, you go have questions ready. So it's that in-between part. But when we're talking about service design and experiences itself, when we talk about physical experiences, I think it's got a massive key. So there was some architect, and I can't remember his name, his methodology or his saying was that you design the environment first, you then design the city, then you design the streets, then you design the houses in particular. And when you're talking about experiences and when you're talking about digital experiences, so if we talk about speed to buy here, we're talking about digital and physical experiences that we're upgrading. So we're talking about coming in with frictionless Face ID, we're talking about tracking data on the slopes, we're talking about billboards, kiosks, and then we're talking about mobile, and we're talking about responsive website as well, and the app. What it needs across there is all consistency, consistent language, consistent labeling, consistent structures. You want to be speaking the same language and you want to understand how it's all connected together through, maybe it's through a customer account. Everything's connected through the customer account, the wallet as well. So you want to understand the complexity of the physical and digital experience, how it works. And then you can get into designing your digital experiences with the knowledge of how it will be consistent and kind of used by the user as well. So I think it's really good with visual experiences, and when we're talking about service design and designing physical and digital experiences.
And just an extension again is, how does it change the process of writing requirements or user stories?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I in particular haven't really figured that bit out yet. I've worked that bit out. This is really because my PM will still use his PIDs, and we need that sign off by the client regardless. So it's not as if we're shoving this from the client straight off and we're like, oh, this is what you're signing off on. It's really getting his PIDs, so we're understanding his PIDs and his requirements. We're then getting the user research done already and kind of triangulating in the way to understanding the complexity of it all and how it all works together. So yeah, at the moment, from what I've observed, it's just easier for the PMs just to do their PIDs and briefs first and requirements first. And then you start to go backwards and forwards with them. That's what we've discovered. Do we need to change what we've signed off on and scoped?
What's the PID? What's the PID?
PID, product requirement description. Is that right?
PRD or PID?
PRD.
PRD.
Product requirement.
Product requirement description.
It describes the product. Yeah.
There was another question which was interesting. Again, I'll kind of reframe it a little bit. How do you get buy-in from the larger business into OOUX and more broadly into UX? So a lot of our colleagues aren't fortunate enough to have the presence that digital labs have, or like a larger design team. How do you introduce OOUX or any other methodology that's user-centric, human-centric into getting buy-in from your management? So
we've got a fair few people here from Emirates MBD, don't we? Yeah,
yes, there's a big contingent. Asad, you got to come more often to the meetup.
I won't go into details, but it can be hard, and I've realized in the region it can be extremely hard, especially with certain child banks. But what happens is, yeah, like for me in particular, if I wasn't able to get larger buy-in from the stakeholders, I was kind of the person who would start to do it anyway and do it in my own sense, and then kind of show them. It's always easier to show people. If you've got someone in the corner being like, oh, we should do this, should do this, should do this, and your plan's differently, but I don't see the value of doing something differently, or you're not showing me what you actually mean or what the effort's going to be behind it, then it's going to be hard to sign off it and give you buy-in for it, or it's going to be hard for me to say, I'm going to dedicate your time to do this. If you're showing the best way I've always been to it, if you're going for more business lens, it's always showing about the case of having less solutions means less development times, means less rework. And that's always the way that business kind of gets buy-in from my perspective. So if we talk about more solutions, we've got more possibilities of redoing work. We've got more possibilities of having to duplicate work and just more developer effort. But if we understand what the solution is, which UX helps us do, it helps us define it and helps UX, or UX helps us do this as well. It brings it down to one solution, and we're pretty all aligned to that one solution. So when we see the cost benefit of it and the reduction of effort going into that, that for me, from a business perspective, was a good way to get business buy-in from UX. But other than that, if they're not listening to you after that, then you kind of just show them and get your teammates on board, then you show it to your manager and so forth. But yeah, I know it's tricky. And I don't think there's one answer for it, because you go to different agencies, you go to different companies here, and it's going to be a completely different CEO head of digital, and they're going to have a completely different background. And then you're just going to say, copy this app instead. They've done all the UX for you. What's the point? And then you're like, well, it's got a really good point. They have done a really good job of this. Maybe we should just copy it. So yeah, it depends on who you're working with, but really it's showing rather than telling.
Nice. I do agree. I think it especially in a market that's perhaps not as mature, it's really applying design practice thinking to whatever organization you're in and the maturity of where they're at, because it's not a one size fits all.
Yeah, I mean, being with a company here once, like I talked about bringing up a design library at that point, comparing the design library, and we had to get these templates and we just be able to rapidly design. And they were like, no, we're not going to do this. Like, why? I was like, we want you to work on this feature. We don't want you to work on a whole library for the app. You should have already done that. And then we kind of secretly did it at the same time, and then we were able to spit things out quicker. And they asked, like, why are you doing things quicker? I was like, oh, we've got this library now. We can now drag and drop. We can get a content design. It's now into design if they want. And yeah, so yeah, once again, it's showing my time. But yeah, the maturity here can be different compared to company.
So I think there was one question as well, like if you were to flip it to an engineer, a developer, how do you get buy-in from developers? So we spoke about the top, what about your colleagues and teammates? How do you justify doing this and show them the return on investment?
So their return on investment, and something I've always just shown the developers straight away and got them involved with, is understanding the data, what's available to us, and we're not pitching to the sky of promising the client something we don't have data for. So when I go through them and say, this is what we're thinking of designing, and this is the different attributes and data, again, they kind of sign off and get their validation like, yes. And when they see the system model of how everything links up together, their eyes spark because they understand it and they understand where we're coming from, and then you can have those discussions. So I'd always get the relationship map in front of them and how the different objects are related to each other. And I would start talking to them about what data we can have available to them and how they're going to be connected, because they're going to see the value of that straight away, because they know it's going to be, they know it can be done then, and getting validation from them earlier on.
Cool. What has made OOUX particularly relevant to math? E.g. math having strong retail and physical presence with the objects that consumers interact with.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'm kind of a lone soldier at the moment in my team going over it. The content strategists we've got on board now love it, and we're getting along fine. But if we're talking about math in particular, hopefully I'm not saying something I shouldn't get, but
only broadcast to the whole internet.
If we're talking about things like Magic Planet, we're talking about things like Dreamcast, we're talking about things like Speedify. It's the idea of why do we have a booking system for each of those? Why don't they on the same booking system? Why aren't they doing subscription? So we need to find out what the consistencies are of each of the experiences. What are the packages made up of in each of those? Why aren't they consistent across each? So it's unifying each of those experiences, bringing to a booking engine that will work for each, and then be able to make it more consistent. And you guys might be able to do things like, subscription and bundles. I'm talking on the top of my head here, but having the OOUX approach breaks down the complexity and allows us to design with a lot of different experiences at once.
Awesome. Any other final questions on the floor? Yes.
It's music to my ears that you are redoing the experience for Ski Dubai, because I live there practically. Half of my life is there, and I have had many pain points. So good, you're working on them. Happy to hear that. I recently worked on a project where I'm a service designer, and now I've realized that I actually was working with OOUX. Now I just saw your landing page, like, oh, that's what it is. And we originally did the wireframes, but then our digital strategist changed it and applied this concept. And through that way, we were able to achieve many things. Number one, the client was able to understand it much clearer than a normal wireframe, because they were able to see where the objects were, the features, and it just made sense to them. And it was like, okay, I get it. With the wireframe, it's like, okay, so how does it work? How do you transition from one page to another? So that's definitely one of the big benefits to win over a client with OOUX that I didn't know I was. Now,
I mean, it's just natural. It's just someone's going to turn now, so it's
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. Number two, it was easier to apply this OOUX because coming from all the blueprints and journey maps that I was doing was easier to populate the landing pages with the features. And thirdly, we were able to cost out the features much more clearly as
Yes.
a business case
Yes.
and be able to prioritize and decide what was going to be in the MVP.
Estimations become a lot easier when you're understanding what you're designing, or at least a little bit.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Estimations.
this is also music to my ears, and
Awesome.
this was the first UX designer that had applied this OOUX to any of the projects that I've been working on before, and it really made my life a lot easier too with my
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, that's why I got kind of really excited about it. Thanks for sharing that. But yeah, it just makes complexity so much more simple, and you can talk about it easier between anyone. And estimations for me was the biggest thing. I can now estimate easier based on effort, based on what we're going to be designing.
Awesome. Any final thoughts, Brenton?
No, that's about it. If you want to ask any questions, feel free, or apply for Digital Labs. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. We're looking.
Another round of applause. Thank you, Brenton. Thank you, Dave, Adil, Atolye crew. And we are taking a break from December, so happy holidays, and we'll see you in January. Thanks, everyone.